Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. It is 11 o'clock right now, and we will start our webinar. I'm Natalia Lermer, and I will be the facilitator for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Dr. Turan Ayvaz. Thank you for joining ANAB for our complimentary webinar on assuring intended learning outcomes in training and education programs. Note that we will be recording this webinar, so it will be available for future viewing on our website. Some logistics before we get started. Due to the high attendance, everyone will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. Please enter your questions into Q&A box. We will have planned time at the end of the webinar to answer any questions asked. And as I mentioned earlier, our presenter today is Dr. Turan Ayvaz. Dr. Ayvaz is the director of the Certification Accreditation Program, otherwise known as CAP, at the ANSI National Accreditation Board, or ANAB. His primary focus areas include overseeing the accreditation process under ANSI ASTM E2659 standard for practice of certificate programs, managing client relationships, and providing subject matter expertise to all involved parties. Prior to joining ANAB, Dr. Ayvaz was with Macro International, a government consulting firm, where he provided program evaluation and workforce development support to the several U.S. federal agencies. He was also a research fellow at the George Washington University Center for the Study of Learning, conducting research and consulting projects on organization and leadership development. Dr. Ayvaz has also extensive experience in quality management fields such as ISO 9001 series of standards. He holds a doctorate in human and organizational learning from the George Washington University. With that, I will hand over control to Dr. Ayvaz to provide us with some insight into assuring intended learning outcomes in training and education programs. Dr. Ayvaz?
Thank you, Natalia. Hello, everyone. This is Turan. So I will be talking about some important concepts for training and education programs and how can we make sure that those type of programs produce the results that we hope and all learners or participants will achieve something at the end of those courses, especially during these times when pandemic changes the certain conditions in training and development industry. Many of the training programs are trying to restructure either to online or some other ways to make sure that learners still get their chance for certain capacity. So before I get into some details, I would like to talk about that concept of learning outcome. What is a learning outcome? So the term that intended learning outcome, meaning that hope that of those outcomes of a learning event will be achieved, is basically what participants or students should know or be able to do at the end of the course that they couldn't do before. So at the end, this is the main objective of any type of training education program. Doesn't matter it is a college course or a workforce-related training program or online program. So you don't have to be a training provider to look for this kind of learning outcome. If you're a parent, if you're sending your kid to school or college, that you want to make sure that your kid will get something out of that experience. Or if you're attending a course yourself, hoping that experience will gain, that you will gain something that you can use for your work, for your employment or promotion. Or if you're an employer, that when you are seeking how can you increase the capacity of your workforce, your employees, that you want them to learn new ways of doing things, you want to make sure that they get what they're supposed to get during these learning events. So in sum, the intended learning outcomes are the heart or maybe the starting point of any type of training education program. Just to give a little bit of a detail about intended learning outcomes, these are basically a basic statements that, as you can see on the screen, that just a one sentence that will say student will be able to, basically you will use some sort of an action verb on that particular topic and then refer to some object area. It should be measurable, observable, and also specific. And if you just need to give an example, we can say, let's say if this is an accounting course that you are trying to provide or you're trying to get, what you should be looking is that a learning outcome statement for that course should be, by the end of this course, students will be able to recognize and diagnose accounting problems. So as you can see here, the red highlighted areas, recognize and diagnose, are action verbs. So that kind of determines what students will be able to do that they couldn't do before taking the course. And accounting problems, basically whatever that object area of or the content area of that course. So you can find a lot of resources, even some dictionaries that what those kind of action verbs should be. Action verbs should be measurable, observable, and specific, and therefore some verbs like students will learn. Learn is not specific or is not really observable. You have to put some more specific verbs there in order to make sure that specify what type of learning outcomes need to be achieved at the end of the course. Some of the uses of these learning outcomes, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. For example, this model, constructive alignment model of an John Biggs that was created by him several decades ago. It's quite popular now, especially in the higher education sector, and even European Union qualification framework takes that model as the base. Basically, in this model, as you will see, that there is a learning outcome as a starting point. Then once you define the learning outcomes, then you will go into the assessment, that how can you assess those learning outcomes. And once you determine the assessment methodologies of those learning outcomes, then you design the teaching learning activities. And then each area will basically provide feedback to the other, and then you can either change some of the assessment techniques that to be aligned with the learning outcomes, or you can change the teaching and learning activities that align with the assessment and learning outcomes. And this model actually was created, one of the early pioneers of training evaluation concept, Dr. Ralph Taylor in early 1940s, and John Biggs basically built up on that model. Just to give some anecdotes about the word even training. I'm a kind of a big believer of these concepts, how even verbs being constructed over the course of humanity, when a word that we are using to identify in certain activities, then when we look at what is the root of that word, what is the etymology, it's interesting. I find that definition of training, for example, coming from the Latin word trahere, or vulgar, the colloquial Latin tragere, meaning that as a verb to pull and to draw, and as a noun is meaning that a connected series of things. So it's a proof that even the root of the word training meaning a series of activities, not just one thing that can be defined as a training, but is a series of activities that constitutes what a training should be about. And just to give an example of this, one of the most commonly used models of instructional design, called the ADDIE model, analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation, is kind of a proof of that etymology of the training word. As you can see here, there is a cycle, and each concept is connected to each other. Usually, these kind of models, although there are a couple of other models on the field like SAM or others, but at the end, each will contain those 5 major areas, meaning that you have to start with the need analysis, and then you have to go with the design of the program, and then you have to go to the development phase and implement the program, and at the end, evaluate the whole cycle. And then with the feedback you get from the evaluation, you can just revisit your need analysis, program design, development, and maybe change even the implementation. And as you will see on this cycle, there are certain steps, and LO, it's just written here, meaning learning outcomes, are actually quite important, because that's how you assure the learning outcomes, making sure that each step is connected to each other and open to feedback. So therefore, when you find out that certain conditions changes in the industry or certain target audience changes, so you will have chance to revisit your whole structure of your offering. So therefore, you will be able to provide a more effective learning experience for the participants or students. And just to look at that alignment and look understanding how a training education program is actually connected parts, as the etymology of the word suggests. Usually, when we are looking at any training program, sometimes mistakenly we think that content is just a training, or when you're looking at lecturing is just a training. But actually, those independent or these separate activities is not the whole training concept, but actually there are certain systems within the training and education program. And it doesn't really matter if this is a small work-related course or a college course or any type of self-improvement course. Any type of training education program that showing the quality should have these 3 major components as the part of their design. One is the learning system, as just I showed you the instructional design methodology. The learning system basically determines how that whole learning process will be laid out, and how the course content will be created, how need analysis will be done, and how the whole instructional process will be designed, development, implemented. But that's not just enough. Also, you have to have some sort of an assessment system identifying that how learners will achieve those outcomes, and how can you make sure those outcomes will be assessed. So therefore, you have to have also some sort of an assessment system, either test or exam or some sort of competency demonstration, that making sure that learner learn what they're supposed to learn, and that assessment system can determine that level of confidence. And there are different types of assessment system can be used for depending on what type of program you're offering. If this is a knowledge-based course, then you should be using a criterion reference methodology. meaning that if you're saying that you have to have a passing score or cut score in the exam, you cannot just say the passing score is, let's say, 70 because it's a handsome number, but rather it should be created based on a criterion reference methodology using different kind of techniques. So when when the participants complete the course, that passing score assures that the learner learned the content. So it means that the assessment is valid and reliable. And then another system is the management system of that kind of connecting both learning system and assessment system. As you may think that when you're offering any type of course, there's also some sort of a operational structure behind that activity, meaning that looking at the organizations or training providers or educational organizations structure in terms of how to manage the particular activities, making sure the competency of the instructors assured, making sure there is a feedback process based on an auditing of all their activities, and also making sure that certain operational concepts, operational activities are in place. For example, any course that you may think this is just the front end, you are taking the course content, but in order to be that course content or exams being created, there is a huge activity in the kitchen side. So that activities should be based on certain principles, certain policies and procedures to make sure that the continuous improvement will be assured, and also certain activities will be, no matter what, continue and have this operational continuity. So once you create all these different moving parts aligned with each other, and once you start offering your program, there are those concepts that we call it educational defensibility will be apparent. Basically, any quality training education program, once you follow the certain principles of training and development, will have to produce these two evidence in terms of how that training or education program is defensible. Defensibility, basically, there are a couple of other validity and reliability items, but the two most important ones are that the content must be valid, meaning that the content must be based on an industry accepted practice and also approved and monitored by certain expert oversight group that will basically validate that content is relevant to that particular area of that practice. So that validity of the content is making sure that the learners, when they learn something during the course, it will be correlated, relevant to the needs of the stakeholders. Let's say you are completing a course in project management, whatever the project management content areas there, it should be based on the need of the industry or employers or the general understood principles of what project management should be. So that basically assures that when a learner or student complete a course, that will be quite aligned with the industry. And as we can see, mostly in colleges and some other programs, we hear that complain a lot that there is a disconnect between what's being taught during a course and what employers are seeking for. there was a kind of an interesting survey a few years ago, the Gallup organization published, and in that survey, it's been asked to college professors that how confident that they are their students learn or achieve those course outcomes that relevant to the industry needs. And college professors said it's about more than 80%. And then they asked the same question to the employers, that how they see that what percentage of the students achievement of the course outcomes relevant to the industry needs. And they also said about 80%, not. Meaning there's almost a 60% gap between what college professors think and what employers think. And that is because that content validity is not there. Another important item is the assessment validity and reliability. As I just mentioned, assessment is the tool that assuring that learners learn what they're supposed to learn. And how can you make sure is that whether assessment is valid and reliable. It means that the scoring of the learner assessment must be based on a passing standard established through a criterion reference method. And that is mostly about the knowledge-based courses. But let's say if you have a competency-based demonstration or a type of certain college courses, then the different type of rubrics can be used. For example, in many of the high-stake training programs, the passing score could be pass or fail, or sometimes it could be 100 that you need to achieve all the learning outcomes. But at least those type of assessments should be based on a criterion reference method. So making sure that when someone passes the course with certain passing score, that passing score should really reflect of that valid and reliable assessment creation. Educational defensibility, as I explained, basically making sure that your training or education program is valid and reliable. So how that can be used also in certain times. Defensible education also may translate to legal defensibility in certain cases. If there are certain investigations or inquiries, whether the state assessment results and generally the program is defensible of court of law. In many training providers that may operate in those industries, what we call is high consequence environments, meaning that if learners do not learn what they're supposed to learn, they can endanger someone's life or they can cause big financial problems. And in certain cases, if let's say there is an incident, especially in those industries, high consequence environments like oil and gas and nuclear or any type of safety related programs, and any type of program, what we call is high stake programs. High stake here doesn't mean the importance of the training program, but the stake at the end of the training, meaning mostly related to employment. So if there are certain, at certain times, if there are some incidents in that industry or in that particular company, usually to understand the reasons of that incidents, they will be looking for investigator teams or any legal teams in order to make sure that those repair activities will be correlate to the outcomes of that incident, they will be looking for certain reasons. And generally, two types of reasons will be a cause for any type of incident or accident. One is usually a machinery error, that certain equipment didn't work or certain system in the company that's being used didn't work. And the other type is the human error, meaning that there's nothing wrong with the machinery or there's nothing wrong with the system they're using, but that could be a human error. So if the main reason is not a machinery error or any type of system error, when they are looking at the human error, again, they will be looking at two types of reasons. And one could be a negligence, meaning that employee didn't do deliberately what he or she is supposed to do. Let's say slept on the job or didn't pay attention. And the other reason will be a competence issue. And in case of there is no negligence, then the major target for the investigation will be the competence of the individual. And when the competence is in the focus of that type of inquiry, then the main investigation area will be whether or not that employee or employees trained properly. And when you're trying to provide that evidence, that training program has that educational defensibility, meaning that the training program has a valid content and valid and reliable evidence, these validity and reliability can be used as a scientific evidence in the litigation cases in the court of law. There are like quite a number of court cases in the United States that legal defensibility, when they are investigating, especially in the certification programs or licensing programs, that content validity and assessment validity and reliability is being used as scientific evidence. Of course, we are not saying here that when you have valid and reliable exam of your course, you will just walk out that courtroom that day, but at least you will have a great tool to defend your program. And it is not just that worst case scenario, but also to assure your stakeholders, your company, your board of directors, and most importantly, your customers, because at the end you want to make sure that they have confidence in you that that particular training education program will produce that learning outcome they are looking for. So that is basically the general evidence that can be used in those kind of cases. So the concepts that I just talked about are basically all explained in one particular document called ANSI ASTM E2659 standard. This is an American nation standard, and it is particularly for the standard practice for certificate programs. And certificate program, the name certificate program being chosen for this standard because when standard being created in 2009, any type of training education program, especially because of the higher education was using the term certificate and industry was using the term certificate increasingly, so it was named as a certificate. But the essence of that standard is basically any type of training education program that by itself that can be independently being created and also managed. So therefore, any type of training education program that can be used by any industry, even certain course colleges that can be related to this part of standard. And as we are increasingly seeing that the higher education offering more certificate, short-term job-related programs over the years, and even the structures of the universities now coming to a certain level, most universities now establishing a separate schools in the name of School of Professional Studies or School of Continuing Education Studies. So they mostly offer those type of short-term training programs in the name of certificate. So this ANSI ASTM E2659 is a standard that ANAB is using for its certificate accreditation program. And basically, that standard has three major sections. One section is the requirements for certificate issuer, is the organization. And I just showed you a couple slides ago that one section solely define certain requirements about the management system of any organization should be in place. And then the second section is the requirements for the certificate program, meaning the actual training activities. And that section basically defines that instructional design plan for the components of analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation, and also defines how to structure an oversight group as an expert panel to approve that activities of the training provider, and also defines what type of how to create those measurable learning outcomes and how to create that assessment system that will make sure that using criterion reference methodologies and therefore will provide valid and reliable assessments. And then the one other section is about the issuance of the actual certificate, meaning that what type of designations, if one wants to use, or also the certificate's term of validity. And as you may know, some training programs may have a shorter shelf life. Let's say if it is an IT-related certificate, usually will be, depending on the technological changes, any type of IT or technology-related training programs content will be absolute in few years. So therefore, you have to define some sort of validity of that content to make sure that the learners and industry understand that this content is valid for a certain period of time. But whereas in some other areas, for example, in writing or in more soft skill areas, let's say in creative writing, you can put the validity as a lifetime because technological or any type of legal changes does not affect the validity of the content. So these are the major components of the standard that covers most areas that making sure any type of training and educational programs that should have those components. One other important aspect is that how ANAB is conducting those kind of assessment activities is basically defined by an international standard, ISO IEC 1711, and this is our ANAB's guideline that how we are conducting those accreditation activities. And basically, we are looking at every step of the assessment process, and we are complying with that international standard. And basically, this standard is being created by, approved by ISO, and so therefore, any type of accreditation body, a national accreditation body, should oblige with these requirements of this standard. And that involves basically making sure that there should be a comprehensive paper review and also following up with the on-site visit to verify the findings of those kind of paper review. And it is requiring that the assessment process should have a full-time staff to administer and have trained and qualified assessors for using the assessment activities. And also, ANAB's accreditation is being approved by an accreditation committee that comprised by national experts that they are responsible for overseeing the policies and procedures and determining the accreditation decision based on the assessor's recommendation. Besides the educational defensibility that is the main market value of any type of training education program, there are several other additional market values of that type of training and education programs that will be created to assure the learning outcomes. And one of those market values is actually the federal government that actually encourage this kind of assessment process, because as you may know that when you attend any type of training program, doesn't matter if it is an in-person or online, sometimes it's hard to determine what is the value of that piece of paper you received. Does it have any particular structure, or does it have any assessment, or does it have any value in terms of employer? So OPM actually, when ANAB was creating this program more than a decade ago, was one of the organizations encouraged ANSI, because federal government, when they are buying a service from outside, either doing contracting or requesting proposals for certain training activities, they want to make sure that there is some sort of criteria to make sure those certificates just based on some attendance versus the certificates that based on assessments will be distinguished. So therefore, OPM was one of the original organizations that encouraged this type of creation of this type of accreditation programs of the ANAB. And other additional market value we can talk about that, as I mentioned, most training programs basically calculated based on a seat time. And before, especially, determining a training program's value, you may just think how many hours training that someone received. And we think that if that person received that many hours of training, he or she must learn something. But it might not be the case all the time, because just being in an environment that someone is just providing information in a classroom environment, or that you are in online program and you are watching few slides over your screen, does not mean that you learn something. So therefore, many of the certificate programs, training education programs, have those kind of determined learning outcomes in place. Even if they don't have any type of evaluation methodology. And also, even if they do, those assessments may not be aligned with that learning outcome. So as we mentioned in the beginning, that whole structure of these different interconnected areas should be aligned in order to assure that learning outcomes achieved. And that also increases a concern for the employers because, as I just mentioned for the Gallup organization survey, employers just think, workers do not have the knowledge and skills as advertised, as, either colleges or training providers claim, because then employers are the ultimate unit, ultimate authority to determine, that type of outcome. And that skill gap that we are all talking about between education and practice is growing increasingly. And that is one of the reasons why it's growing, because there is not much of an alignment between evaluation, assessment, and also the industry accepted practices. And also another interesting development is higher education now is using certificate programs increasingly besides their regular degree programs. One reason is that short-term training programs are more attractive to the individuals because of several other developments in the industry. We can call it employers would like to get more out of those training experiences, and also the continuing learning becoming almost a center of any professional development and competency of the employers concepts. More and more individuals enroll in colleges, and therefore they tend to enroll of these short-term training programs rather than a degree program. So therefore, there is not much of an oversight of that certificate programs, and higher education accreditation is not really focusing on that short-term programs. Rather, they are more focusing on institutional level. So therefore, this type of quality assurance process for certificate programs are even becoming more important for those type of universities. So you may all think now, okay, you just talked about some good ideas, basically some academic models and some of the, published standards. But what is the evidence that those type of structure for training education programs actually, how they are being used in the industry? So this is kind of a sample of some recognitions of that accreditation and quality assurance process by the industry. So it's an evidence that certain industries actually appreciate, or they would like to see that assurance of that learning outcomes on certain programs. So therefore, they put either the requirement or suggestion for certain industries. One of them is Department of Education selected ANAB for a particular initiative called is Educational Quality Through Innovative Partnership EQUIP project. You may just Google that and you will find the details of that project. And basically it was a project about how higher education would get some input from other types of organizations like ANAB and can make some lessons learned for the higher education accreditation system. The other recognitions from Department of Defense, basically DoD, based on an instruction that they published, any type of organization that accredited by ANAB, their participants will be eligible for tuition reimbursement directly by DoD. And this is not even related to GI Bill that's being managed by Veterans Affairs. This is even easier and more practical kind of opportunity for veterans. And also we had accredited several DoD organizations, units that showing how DoD is really appreciates that quality assurance process. And as you may know, that the Army actually doesn't need really any outside organization to make sure that training provides those learning outcomes. But since they just want to make sure that their policies and procedures assuring that learners will learn what they're supposed to learn in place, so therefore they even invite ANAB to accredit their programs. And other type of recognitions, in one example, like Food and Drug Administration requires in certain grant proposals that in order to be eligible for that grant, ANAB's accreditation will be required in order to be eligible for that grant. And there are a couple of organizations over the years, like FDA, published such requirements, like FEMA, about more than 5 years ago, had a similar requirement for their own auditor training programs. And also, there are certain states require ANAB accreditation to assure those training programs will produce those learning outcomes, especially in the food safety area. Right now, California, Illinois, Texas, in a couple of other states require that ANSI accreditation must be achieved in order to offer those programs. So if you are one of those states, if you go to any restaurant of those food handlers, the individuals will serve you the food, the cook, the waitresses. They all went through that food handler training program that accredited by ANSI. So that's their state law. So, and lastly, if you would like to know more about these kind of concepts, we are actually having a technical conference, credentialing technical conference, almost in a month. So I encourage you to attend this conference. You are seeing the link here, and also you can see the agenda on that link. It's a 3-day conference, so you can have all these different topics, interesting topics. And this conference will not be just for the certificate programs, but also certification programs. So it's a general credentialing technical conference, will cover all the psychometric management system and certification and certificate programs, interesting areas.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So that will be the end of my presentation, and I'm ready for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Taran. That was a great presentation. We have had a few questions come through, and we'll get to those after we discuss some additional resources available for accredited organizations as well as organizations that are seeking accreditation. ANAB has many different media to further your understanding of standards, accreditation, management systems, and assessments. On the ANAB website, there are free webcasts on a variety of topics. These webcasts are 15 to 20 minutes long, depending on the topic, and can be viewed at any time. ANAB also has a blog page with a wealth of information related to risk, accreditation, standards, requirements, and many others. We are also going to have these webinars monthly, so please keep your eye out on our website for upcoming topics. Finally, ANAB offers training in many other areas, including internal auditing, standards, risk, and other topics. As with assessments, training has changed significantly with the pandemic and travel restrictions. All of our traditional in-person classes are now offered their workshops through a remote approach through WebEx. All of these resources can be found on the ANAB website. Now, let's get to the fun part, your questions. Turan, the first question is to you. Does ANAB accredit training providers outside the United States?
Yes, we do. We actually accredit organizations outside the United States. We accredit several organizations in the Middle East, especially in the UAE, United Arab Emirates. And interestingly, the reason why our accreditation was demanded in that region is actually the exact reason why I mentioned about educational defensibility and legal defensibility issues, because as you may know that oil and gas is the main industry over there, and oil and gas is considered as a high consequence environment. Even a smallest mistake can cause big, incidents and can cause huge economic and financial, results. So therefore, that industry wants to make sure that, first of all, their employees have all the competencies, and second of all, making sure that operational continuity does not interrupt. So therefore, we accredited several organizations in the Middle East. In UAE, we have applicants in Saudi Arabia, but also we accredit organizations like South Africa, a healthcare training company. We accredit organizations in Philippines. So we accredit organizations in our, border, Canada, and we have also interested parties and potential the current applicants that preparing their materials in several other regions. So therefore, we don't have any restriction geographically. We can accredit any organization from any country.
Awesome. To follow up on that question, can a small training provider apply the standard to their organization and get accreditation?
Yes. Actually, that was sometimes the concern when a training provider says that, oh, okay, Turan, you mentioned all of these good stuff that what a training provider should be doing, but aren't they for those well-established large corporations? And our answer is no. These principles can be applied for any type of training education providers, and indeed we accredited very small, as you can call mom and pop shop type of training providers, because at the end, learning is learning, and it can be in a large company or a small company. So principles is basically same. Of course, we are not trying to impose here or prescriptive in terms of what they should be doing. These are minimum quality benchmark requirements. So therefore, it can be applied for any type of training provider. It can be online, in-person, competency-based, large corporations. We accredited, as I said, U.S. Army, but we accredited small food handler training providers and oil and gas training providers. So size here doesn't matter. What matters is how you put your training program in place in a quality format.
Awesome, thank you. Next one is how a university can use the ANAB certificate accreditation program.
Yes, as I mentioned, higher education using now those short-term training programs more than ever. Interestingly, I was just reading a few months ago a report. Harvard University published their own training programs, and they were saying that until 2009, in 2019, their non-degree program offerings and their revenues are equivalent to their degree program's revenue. And after 2019, they were expecting that their non-degree programs offerings revenues will be higher than their degree programs. And this is almost true for every single university. So they are seeing that short-term certificate programs are more demanded than their degree programs because now the continuing education and continuous learning is almost becoming a norm. So therefore, a university traditionally was just focusing on certain age group, like 18 to 22-year-olds, and now, like as of this year, the typical college attendee or university attendee's age is 35, and they're expecting within next decade it will increase, to 40 to 45 range. So to assure that type of age groups requests, universities may want to provide more evidence that why they should be getting this course, because at the end, most of the employers will not really seek for just a piece of paper, but they want to get a real result that they can apply to their job or to their employment field. So therefore, this type of particular quality assurance process, for the certificate programs are becoming important to assure that, target audience. Basically, when you look at any training program, college students may not be putting that type of priority that will I learn something here, but mid-career employee will put that need in the first place, and therefore this type of accreditation will clear that ambiguity whether or not this certificate program will add something to his or her career and will give confidence. So it will move from ambiguity to the confidence in terms of offering. And most importantly also, employers will see that result when they are trying to distinguish whether or not that particular certificate program means something. If they just sit in a classroom and listen to a lecturer versus they learn the content based on valid and reliable assessment.
We have a follow-up question on that. Does ANAB accreditation program cover nursing and medical facilities?
It depends. If, as you, some of you may know, our accreditation is volunteer, and in certain organizations, they seek accreditation, and certain healthcare organizations may require this type of accreditation. So it depends on that particular industry. And usually in the healthcare industry, the healthcare, because it's quite a regulated area, they usually have their own approval or licensing boards. But if they require an extra step to cover those kind of training programs, then they should be based on certain industry association that covers that particular nursing area. But what I'm also seeing that last few years, we've been in certain communication with those organizations, especially in the healthcare area. One benefit of the ANAB's accreditation, because of that assured learning outcomes, it actually can be used for reducing the medical malpractice insurance premiums. we have organizations accredited, we have applicants, and they are just applying ANAB accreditation just solely for that reason, because when they are in that, when you are in that profession, you want to make sure that your competency, the professional competency, is valid and assured by that third-party organization. So for those kind of health-related industries, that was one of the benefits of using. But again, in nursing field, it could be used, but again, depending on that particular nursing organization's requirement.
Thank you. And as we're coming up to noon here in Washington, D.C., we are at the end of our session, but I have one more question that a person was waiting for a while for, so I want to make sure it gets answered, and then we will conclude. Please do remember that this recording will be available on our website. Last question to you, Turan. Could you give a real-life example how the educational and legal defensibility concepts are being used?
Yes. I can give you actually two examples that actually kind of I mentioned about that, why our accreditation was in demand in overseas, especially in those high consequence environments like oil and gas. As you may remember, like 6, 7, or 8 years ago, then there was an incident in the Mexican Gulf, the Blackwater Horizon incident, and actually there's even a movie a couple of years back then. That was maybe the turning point in that industry when BP messed up the whole Mexican Gulf with that incident. When U.S. government and BP sit down in the litigation table for repair costs, one of the investigations were trying to find out that the cause of the incident, as I mentioned, and they were trying to understand what is the cause, and they found almost nothing wrong with the machinery or that off-shelf drilling platform. But one interesting outcome that came out from that investigation, BP couldn't provide hard evidence of those technicians that were supposed to do certain activities, that they were properly trained on those particular skills. As I mentioned, like providing a scientific evidence, whether their training program based on industrial practices, valid and reliable, more like an apprenticeship that their foremen show them how to do and they assume they learn. So because of that lack of evidence, BP had to pay because they couldn't defend that those technicians are competent. They couldn't provide that evidence. And because of that news, of course, spread out the whole oil industry. And that was the reason almost a couple years later, I was getting inquiries from oil and gas training providers in Middle East because they don't want to be in the same situation. So that is the reason we have some sort of a cluster in that Middle East region, because they learn the lessons there and they don't want to make the same mistake. And they want to make sure that their programs are, training programs are both educationally and legally protected.
Thank you. Well, that's all the time we have for today. On your screens, you do see some contact information for any of your needs. And Turan's information was provided on the first slide if you're interested in contacting him with specific questions about our CAP program. Other than that, I wish you a wonderful rest of your week, and I hope to see you in our next webinar.
Okay, thank you all.